I forgot to trigger the countdown. I'm sorry. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Single Malt Frontier, where we are exploring the fresh, new. Oh, rough start. Sorry, guys. There's always some sort of technical difficulty, and this time, I did it to myself. This time, it's my fault. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Single Malt Frontier. If you're watching this on the Single Malt Frontier, hello. If you're watching this on my YouTube channel, welcome to the Rangers Respite, which is, I guess, where we're broadcasting the show from tonight. We are the Single Malt Frontier. We talk about the new frontier, the bleeding edge of American distilling, and that is single malt whiskey, specifically American single malt whiskey, which is currently awaiting an official ruling on whether or not it will be added to the classifications of American whiskey, such as bourbon or corn whiskey, etc., and so forth. Tonight, we are focusing on Virginia single malt whiskeys. Doug is taking the week off, and this is sort of proof of concept that we can do the show without him, and not going to lie, it's not going great yet, but it will improve, I promise, as soon as I figure out where I'm going. So, why is Virginia kind of important for single malt whiskey? It's not any more important than any other state, but there are a handful of really important distilleries to American single malt whiskey in Virginia. Top of the list is undoubtedly the Virginia Distillery Company out of Livingston, Virginia. They are sort of, when you think of American single malt whiskey inside the Commonwealth of Virginia, you think of Virginia Distillery Company. They weren't the first post-prohibition single malt whiskey distiller in Virginia. That honor, as far as I can tell, goes to Copper Fox Distillery in Sperryville. Rick Wasman got Copper Fox started in 2005, and it is kind of a coincidence that the first bottle of American single malt whiskey I ever owned is this right here. Wasman's single malt whiskey. This would later become sort of the more common on shelves now. This stuff, basically. I figure that's a good place to start. But for those of you who are tuning in for the first time, or maybe aren't really a whiskey person, or particularly not a single malt whiskey person, what is American single malt whiskey? American single malt whiskey is like single malt from any other country. 100% barley and water and yeast. No hops, no other grains. Distilled to 160 proof, barreled in new or used cooperage at no more than 125 proof. That's sort of the basic. And it's one of those awkward categories in American whiskey where there is a pre-existing American malt whiskey standard that is greater than 51% malted barley, distilled at no more than 160 proof, barreled in new charred oak barrels at no more than 125 proof. That is for malt whiskey. What the ASMWA, the American Single Malt Whiskey Association, want to do and are in the process of doing is creating a standard that is more in line with single malt whiskey in the rest of the world, primarily Scotland, Ireland, Japan, India. And their goal there is to create a product that will sit on shelves with an identifiable labeling that any country in the world, you can see American single malt whiskey and know what it is, as opposed to the older malt whiskey designation, which is different from the single malt whiskey or malt whiskey association in other nations. And then there's the question, is there a lot of single malt whiskey made in Virginia? There are a few. I have examples from 5 distilleries. Again, I've got Copper Fox in the glass at the moment. Now, Copper Fox is interesting because they were reportedly the first craft distillery in the U.S. to have their own malting facility. They were smoking over hardwood and fruitwood earlier than anybody else in the States, and it's become sort of characteristic of their malt that it is sort of heavy on that nice fruitwood smoke. There's also the next oldest distillery, founded in 2001, is the Virginia Distillery Company. Of course, their first products fall into a category that I'll talk more about later, but I am going to bring up now, which is kind of, but it's 100% malted barley, but it's not single malt. And there are a handful of examples like that. And then we have, founded in 2015, Spirit Lab Distilling in Charlottesville, Virginia. They were founded the year that Virginia Distillery Company released their first product. And then after them, we have Cashel in 2017. And then in 2020, we have one of the newest distilleries in Virginia, J.H. Bard's. They're way down in Blacksburg, Virginia. They're founded in 2020, and they came into the market with a rye, a bourbon, and a single malt. And they're one of only a handful of brands that have come into the market with a single malt whiskey. Let's see. I guess we can start looking at specific single malt whiskeys. So I've got the Wattsman's in my glass currently. I think I've said that about 3 times. It is distilled from a proprietal strain of barley developed at Virginia Tech. That's the 6-row thoroughbred barley, which is pretty cool, actually. And it is heavy on that rich fruit wood. It's hard to explain, but there's a note. If you've ever done a lot of barbecuing, you know it. It's that sort of like tart apple, sort of a stone fruit, and all of that just sort of with that smokiness combined. It's pretty heavily present on the nose, which is something that you wouldn't necessarily expect if you read that it was lightly smoked. It is one of my favorite whiskeys. This bottle has come with me to D&D a handful of times. It's gone to, barbecues with friends. This is one of my go-to introductions to American single malt whiskey, because it was, in a sense, my introduction to American single malt whiskey. What has sort of taken its place, as I really don't want to just finish up that bottle, is the Copper Fox Peachwood Smoked American Single Malt Whiskey. So whereas the Wasman's is smoked using applewood and peachwood, this is just peachwood smoke. Smoked to approximately 12 to 18 ppm. Made from the same proprietary 6-row thoroughbred barley. And it is a much sweeter smoke. It's got less of that, classic barbecue-y note. Still wonderful. The smoke is slightly less present on this than on the Wasman's, which is not a failing. It is just a difference. But it still has that core of that, sort of nice, bready, rich malt barley note that is a common sort of defining factor of American single malt whiskey. And the 6-row thoroughbred barley that they use is distinct. And I do think that even if you sort of dive past the smoke on the surface and look at the flavor of the barley underneath is distinct from Virginia Distillery Company, from Cashel, Spirit Lab, J.H. Bard's. It is its own thing. It is, without a doubt, an amazing whiskey. Fantastic pairing with barbecue because it does have its own smoke. And if you're out having burgers at a party with friends, it's almost always a hit. But Copper Fox isn't the biggest distillery making single malt whiskey in the Commonwealth of Virginia. That honor probably goes to the Virginia Distillery Company. This is a relatively early batch of their Courage and Conviction line. This is the Nancy Fraley batch. This is from before they reached a point in their blending process where they were getting consistency enough that they didn't feel the need to delineate batches quite so clearly. So relatively early on in the Courage and Conviction line, they were releasing them under with batches named for influences and their distilling heroes. For example, I believe that their first batch was named for their founder. And George Moore was the founder. Sorry, I had a sticky note on here that had a list of the batch names that I've misplaced. I apologize. But early on, they were naming the batches after their heroes, including Nancy Fraley, who is probably one of the best regarded blenders in the industry. Oh dear. Perhaps I will set this one aside for now and having a great night, great time doing this. So I do have another flagship bottling of Courage and Conviction. This is a later batch from after they stopped having batches dedicated to their distilling heroes. Again, which was, that started as both delineation between batches so that they could identify batches based on flavor profile, because they hadn't gotten to a point where their stock was consistent enough that they could, blend batches and have them be indistinguishable. But this is shortly after that. process was ended. And it is sort of the flagship of their Courage and Conviction line, which is their premium line, as opposed to something that I'll talk about in just a moment. And the flagship is sort of a blend of bourbon casks, STR casks, and sherry casks. And it's a wonderfully rich, full, very, very sort of Scotch-inspired malt. It does have those wonderful light fruity notes and that bready malt core, and that little bit of like sherry. It's hard to describe, but there's a character to sherry, and having gone through and done the interview with Nathan Lehman from House of Lustau, I have a new appreciation for what sherry brings to these malts. And I have to say that this is a great example of how that can be blended into an expression, remain identifiable without being overpowering. You can also taste the nice toastiness and sort of red fruit notes of the STR barrel and the vanilla of the bourbon casks on the nose. This is an excellent introduction to American single malt whiskey. As much as I use Copper Fox because it was my introduction to American single malt whiskey, this is without a doubt one of my favorites in a more broad sense. It is beautiful, wonderful stuff, and distinctly Virginia Distillery Company. There's no mistaking this for anything else. And then we have our newer entrants, Spirit Lab Distilling. They do really small runs. They're out in Charlottesville, Virginia. They use a Portuguese 300-liter still, which is really tiny when you think about the scale of production from some what would be considered very small, low production volume facilities. And what they do is unique in that while they do make single malt whiskey and rice whiskey and gins and brandies and whatnot, everything that they do is singular batch. It is always unique. It is never, they don't blend to a spec per se. They have a distillery profile, but they don't blend the way Virginia Distillery Company blends together large batches, or Copper Fox, or Cashel even, because they have such a small facility and such a small output. They have also been on my list to visit for quite a while because I do spend some time in Charlottesville. Their whiskey is totally different. I mean, we've hit fruitwood smoke, unpeated Scotch style. This is unpeated, totally separate style. It is uniquely Spirit Labs. I made a whole video reviewing the maple syrup cask not too long ago. It is an amazing whiskey, totally unique, very different from anything else I've had. It has sort of a starchy note to it that always catches me slightly off guard, and I can't always put my finger on. But so we've hit, those three distilleries, and now we get to the only peated American single malt from Virginia, I'm pretty sure. So Cashel is in the old Armory building, and take their name from small walled forts in Scotland and Northern Ireland. They have a bourbon, an unpeated malt, and a peated malt. It is my personal opinion that their peated malt is what shines the best. And that isn't just because I am a huge fan of peated malt. It's because I think that it's wonderfully well done. They bring their malt in from Scotland. They mash it and distill it in their facility. And it is aged in new charred oak casks. And it is beautiful. There is a character to peat that I think does really well in conjunction with the new charred oak barrels. It's one of the reasons why the charred oak cask Lagavulin, the Offerman edition, is such an interesting and delightful whiskey. And it's the reason why I think that this whiskey is, in its own way, a unique and wonderful whiskey. And they're unique amongst Virginia distilleries as being one of the only ones that is producing a peated malt. Beautiful stuff. It is wonderful. It is bottled at 50% alcohol by volume, and you wouldn't know it based on the sort of easygoing nature of it. Even with all that peat, that smoke, the charred cask notes, it's wonderfully approachable for a 50% alcohol volume peated malt. And that brings us to the last and newest, youngest distillery in the Commonwealth of Virginia that produces a single malt whiskey, J.H. Bard's Spirit Company. Now, I have to preface this with saying I like these guys. I got to speak with a couple of them, I believe one of whom was one of the founders at a Spirits Expo event. And they were remarkably kind people. They were very interested in my thoughts on their whiskey. Now, this is a batch labeled starting with 22, which I believe means 2022. I purchased it in 2023. Early in 2023, I think. No, I purchased this in 2022. I bought this at the first Virginia Spirits Expo that I went to. This is wonderful stuff. Bottled at 46% alcohol by volume. It is a single malt, so it's 100% malted barley. It is young. It still has so much of that new makey funk, that slightly sulfurous, wet cardboard. But there's something there. There's something in the core of this nose that is that, like, recognizable, sparks a thought, a connection to some of the young scotches that I've had. It feels cliched to say that in a few years they're going to be putting out some very wonderful single malt, but I think in a few years these guys are going to be, standing side by side with some of the biggest dogs in American single malt whiskey production in terms of flavor profile and the quality of their product. That isn't to say that it's bad. It's just different. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. This has got like a wonderful funk to it that I think is going to translate well with a few more years of oak. I think that this stuff is going to be wonderful soon. Now, I've touched on all the Virginia single malt distilleries that I have examples from, which is the 5 that I could find examples from. There's, of course, 8 Shires. I unfortunately don't have a bottle of their single malt. It is on my list, but it is difficult to obtain. But since we're here, let's talk about not quite single malt whiskeys, or not quite malt whiskeys, because that is its own category. And I mentioned earlier that I was going to talk about the Virginia Distillery Company VHW Port Cask Finished, a marriage of Scotch malt whiskey and American whiskey finished in port wine casks. This is, this isn't from their first release, not even nearly, but this is batch 14 of the port cask finish Virginia Highland whiskey. This falls into the interesting category of it is technically a blended world whiskey, and sort of the terms that are used internationally for things like Japanese whiskey that is, a blend of Japanese single malt and Scottish malt whiskey. This is sort of the same concept, but with American malt whiskey and Scotch malt whiskey. I'll come back to this in a moment because there's more to talk about there. And there's more to talk about with not quite malt whiskey or not quite single malt whiskey. So anyway, here's Wonder Wheel. This is distilled from a beer. Literally, they took a beer and they distilled it. Started at McDowell Brew Kitchen, distilled and bottled by Catoctin Creek. This is sort of technically, it's American malt whiskey. It is malted barley, no other grain, water, yeast, but it's got hops. And that means that it's kind of in a weird gray area where it is technically a malt whiskey, but technically not a malt whiskey, and it's not a single malt. It's still very good. You might not think that from how little is missing, but I've been focusing so much on other things that I haven't had an opportunity to really sit down and enjoy it. The Midnight Confession, I've had a lot of, and I really enjoy. Same with Colossal X and Harper's Malt. And those are all whiskeys distilled from beer by the Catoctin Creek Distilling Company. They aren't single malt whiskey, even though they are, technically speaking, the product of a single distillery. And they are, technically speaking, malt, but they've got hops in them, which make them not a single malt whiskey. And back to this. One of the things that makes this most interesting is that I'm pretty sure this is an orphan product now. And by that, I mean it's a product that isn't made anymore. There are a lot of definitions for an orphan product. In this case, it is, well, it's not really an orphan product. It is a product that is no longer produced. It has been usurped by another product, one that I haven't had a chance to try yet, but I do have. So that whiskey, the VHW blend of Scottish malt whiskey and American malt whiskey, is being replaced with a proper American single malt from the Virginia Distillery Company as an entry-level gateway to American single malt whiskey. This is their Port Cask Reserve. This is sort of the direct one-to-one replacement for the previous VHW. Let me just find my fact sheet real quick. It is 100% malted barley. It spends an unspecified amount of time aging in first fill ex-bourbon casks. For those that are confused by first fill ex-bourbon, basically first fill in this case means that it's first filling after no longer holding bourbon. Then it is finished in tawny port casks sourced from premium Portuguese bodegas, along with port-style wine casks sourced in Virginia. It's 93 proof, retails for $44.99, which puts it at the lower end of the premium spirits sort of window. This is my first try of it. I have been impatiently waiting. I admit that I did peel the top off and take a sniff, but I have not tried it until now. And let me just, I didn't pour any of the VHW, the previous edition. This is, again, even though it is direct from the ex-bourbon barrels to the tawny port casks for finishing, it does have that very VADC style. Wonderful stuff. On the nose, it's all rich red fruit, bright berries. A little bit of like that bready, like toasted bread note. Some vanilla and a little bit of like cloves or cinnamon or some light baking spice in there. On the palate, it's nice and warming. Wonderfully balanced, wonderfully well integrated finishing here. It melds well, and it becomes probably one of the better balanced blends of the finished whiskey, to be honest. A real testament to the skill and talent of the blending team at Virginia Distillery Company. As you might have guessed by the fact that I have fact sheets, I got this courtesy of our friends at VA Distillery Company to talk about on the show, because this is such a big deal. This is probably one of the most affordable entry-level malts, and it is brand new for this year. This is one of the newest releases, and it hasn't quite gotten all the way out to all the VA ABC stores. I'm not by any means at an extreme of the VA ABC system, but I haven't seen it at my local stores, and I'm really excited by it. It is sort of what a lot of us have been asking for from malt distilleries is something that is a good entry-level malt, both in terms of price point and also in terms of like accessibility of flavor profile. And this, I think, hits the nail on the head. Oh yeah. I like this stuff. I mean, there are very few whiskeys that I don't like, but this is, I think, a really good example of what single malt whiskey can be, and a good representation of American single malt whiskey and Virginia single malt whiskey in particular. But that's not the only new whiskey released by Virginia Distillery Company this year. At the same time that they released the port cask finish, or port cask reserve, they also released the cider cask finish. This is a direct 1-to-1 replacement for the cider cask finished VHW that was a blend of Scotch malt whiskey and American malt whiskey. And I'm going to go ahead and pour myself a little bit of this. I will admit that of the Virginia Distillery Company offerings that I have tried, between the Courage and Conviction, the old port finish, the old cider finish, the double cask reserve, the old cider cask finish was my least favorite. That isn't to say it was a bad whiskey, because it is, in fact, a very good whiskey. It just isn't for me. This is, of course, an American single malt whiskey. It is 100% malted barley, mashed, distilled, fermented, distilled, barreled, bottled in Virginia. Spends an undisclosed amount of time aging in ex-bourbon barrels before a robust finishing in French Calvados casks, premium Virginia cider barrels, and Laird's apple brandy barrels. That's kind of cool. And I think this is shaping up to be the one that is the least for me. I'm not necessarily a huge fan of apple brandy. I've been known to drink cider, but it's not my favorite drink, obviously. It does have that like tart green apple, baking spices, and just a hint of breadiness on the nose. It really does smell like like one of those little apple tarts. I think this is definitely a step up from the old VHW in cider casks. I don't think I like it quite as much as the port finish, but it is very good. I'm like, I think I've said it a couple times. I'm excited about these. I'm excited every time there's another addition to affordable, approachable malts. And, you know, when a distillery with the sort of reach that Virginia Distillery Company has does something like this, where they, you know, make what could be an almost inaccessible high-end spirit accessible to a larger number of people, and brings them into the fold of looking at and enjoying American single malt whiskeys, I think that they do a huge service to the industry. But they didn't just release two. They released a third. And this is actually the one that I'm most excited for. The last one is the Cabernet Cask Select, which is, I don't believe, a direct replacement for a previous VHW release. And I'm going to have to spend more time sitting with these sort of in my own time, writing out notes, really deconstructing them to give you what I really think about them. But so far, I have been very impressed. This is the Cabernet Cask Select, 100% malted barley, aged for an undisclosed amount of time in first fill bourbon barrels, then finished in various Cabernet casks, including premium Cabernet Sauvignon barrels from France and California. All of these are 93 for 46.5% alcohol by volume. These are 700 milliliter bottles, which makes them a better fit for both domestic and international markets. Because in case you didn't know, most of the world uses 700 milliliter bottles, and America is a little bit weird and insisting on 750. Although that has changed. Oh yeah. Black cherry. Like, this is going to be a note that a lot of Americans aren't going to know, but blackcurrant, like if you've ever had creme de cassis, that sort of, except less sweet. It's genuinely like a slightly sweetened jam of cherry, blackcurrant, and obviously like dark purple grapes over like a nice whole grain slice of barley bread. It's funny. I'm not a wine person. I don't particularly enjoy wine, but I really love what a wine does to a whiskey in finishing. I think that it really sets it apart and makes it something interesting and unique that I don't get to see a lot of. Yeah, I think that that's a very good entry to affordable entry-level American single malt whiskeys. They should be hitting shelves soon. Sorry, I have a little bit of a lisp due to a pretty bad underbite. And I keep giving myself the tongue twister of saying words with lots of S's because I am not very good at public speaking. So these are going to be hitting the shelves soon. I'm pretty impressed by them. I think that everybody who likes American single malt whiskey, who's a supporter of the industry, should try to find a way to try them at the very least. I think that these are going to be a really good way to get my friends into American single malt in a way that I haven't been able to previously. And I think that that is going to be one of the more interesting ways of doing it. And now that I've talked about Virginia single malt whiskey and not done a very good job of it, to be honest, I struggle when I don't have somebody to bounce ideas off of and talk to. Let's talk about the other topic. The topic that I honestly didn't tell Doug that I was going to make a major topic of this video or stream, which is the Virginia Whiskey Tournament. This is the third year running it. It's always a lot of fun. I enjoy it every year. Every year brings surprises. The last round, we had 2 surprises. First round victories for both A. Smith Bowman and Spirit Lab Distilling, which, you know, is really cool. It means that for the first time, neither Reservoir or Ironclad are making it on to the second round. Every year they end up in the same bout facing up against each other, and this year neither one of them is moving on, which is a first. It means that we only have a few more weeks to go. In fact, 2 more weeks to go of the first round. There is still time to vote. You have until midnight. Support Virginia Craft Distilling. Even if it's just vibes based, oh, I like their logo, oh, I like their labels. If you want to be involved in this, and I honestly, I recommend it. I know that it sounds self-serving, but there isn't really anything that I get out of this. This is something that I do out of my love for craft distilling, and in particular, the craft distilling taking place in my home state, in the place that I have called home for 30 years, that I love, companies that I love, people who make amazing products and who do their best to support not only their own distillery, but their fellow distillers across the state and across the United States. Please vote. Scrolling on the ticker below me are the places to vote. The Rangers Respite on Twitter, the Rangers Respite on Instagram, the Drinking Geeks on Twitter. The polls are open. Polls close, or I essentially count the votes at midnight on Instagram. Support your favorite label. If you think, oh, that sounds good, absolutely vote for them. Every year, towards the end of the first round, voting drops off a little bit. It's sort of voter fatigue, I like to call it. But there is still time. I would appreciate your support. And I know that these distilleries would appreciate your support. And the more we talk about craft distilling, the better they do. And the better craft distilling does, the more variety we have on shelves. The Virginia Whiskey Tournament started as a way for me to sort of give back to the distilleries that, had just had a really rough year. The first year was in 2022. 2020 and 2021 were extremely hard on craft distilleries. I wanted to raise awareness that there were so many fantastic distilleries in the Commonwealth of Virginia who did so much during the early pandemic years, providing hand sanitizer to first responders, to hospitals, and largely doing so at the cost of their own product. They can only distill so much in a year per their license. They gave up a good portion of revenue generating distillation in order to give back to the communities around them. And I had hoped that I could galvanize some support of these distillers through the Virginia Whiskey Tournament. This is the third year it's gone, and it's been a lot of fun every year. I've gotten to meet some amazing people. I got to meet the folks at Falls Church Distillers, and Mike and Lorenzo are fantastic people. I loved talking to them. And the folks at Catoctin Creek, the winners from last year, fantastic people. They make amazing whiskey and are wonderful, approachable people who are happy to, help other distilleries in terms of, advice and giving a kind word. And perhaps a kind word more than anything, is the best we can do. Well, the best they can do. What we can do is we can buy their products. We can support them. We can tell our friends that, oh, I had a wonderful whiskey from Cashel. You should go buy a bottle. You should go try it. And, there is a trophy at stake. I don't have it to hand at the moment, but there is a trophy at stake. So if you want to see one of your favorite Virginia distilleries, or a distillery that you like the looks of, to have that trophy at the end of the summer, you got to support them. Vote them through. And by the end of the summer, we will be down to 2 distilleries in the Virginia Whiskey Tournament, and they will be facing off for the trophy and the title of Virginia Whiskey Champion. I think that covers all of that. It's been great talking to you. It's going to be a short show tonight because without a co-host to bounce off of, I'm running out of steam. I've gone through my looking at, each Virginia single malt distillery that I can talk about. I've talked about the brand new products from the Virginia Distillery Company that are amazing and that I wholeheartedly recommend finding and trying. And I've talked about the Virginia Whiskey Tournament. I think that covers everything. So, until next time, we'll see you in the lodge. Sláinte.